Welcome to Authors and Others. I'm your host, Peter Dunn, and our guest today is Armistead Maupin, author of Tales of the City series and Maybe the Moon. The most recent work is out in paperback, The Night Listener, and has also been adapted to the screen and stars Robin Williams. Now, Armistead, this is your most autobiographical work to date, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and I will never do it again. It was pretty agonizing, actually. I took two elements from my life. One, the breakup with my partner 10 years ago. And I started writing this novel when we were still in the midst of that. So I was sort of trying to explain that to myself while it was going on. But the central mystery behind The Night Listener is something that actually happened to the two of us. I was sent a manuscript of a book back in 1992 that was written by a 14-year-old boy who had AIDS, who had basically been sold into a life of prostitution by his parents when he was as young as 8 years old. Oh. And but it was an amazingly brave thing written by this pubescent boy, I guess you could say. And he had pneumocystis pneumonia at the time and had a leg that had been amputated because of having had some infection, I don't know. He was in terrible shape, and yet he'd written this amazingly brave book. And so I asked the publisher if I could contact the kid and tell him how good it was, because from all indications, he didn't have much time left. So he checked with the boy's adoptive mother. He had been adopted by a social worker once he'd been run away from his parents. And she said, oh, yeah, he's a fan of your books. He'd love to talk to you. So I found myself on the phone with this scrappy 14-year-old kid who was kind of straight identified, who would make, I guess, probably a term I can't use on the air, but a teasing remark about me in the most friendly kind of way as a gay man. And I was crazy about him. He was the sweetest kid. We'd talk about the movies. He'd call up and gab away about things, and we'd get into some real serious life issues and that sort of thing. And one day, my partner got on the phone. He'd been talking to Tony. That was the kid's name. But he'd never talked to Vicky, the adoptive mother. And when he spoke to her, he turned to me and said, "I can't believe you've never noticed." And I said, "Noticed what?" He said, "As far as I can tell, that's the same voice." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, Vicky and Tony have the same voice." And I said, "Well, why would that be? You know, this is an impersonation? What the hell? Why would anybody want to do that?" And that question opened up a mystery in my life that went on for 6 years. I talked to this person on the phone for 6 years, and I was never fully certain whether it was this woman impersonating this sick, dying child, or whether there were actually two people there on the other end, and she was caring for the child.
That must have been quite a dance.
It was. It was really strange, because at that point I had developed a connection with this person, and I felt almost disloyal questioning it in any way. It's an odd thing to say, since, I was the one who was being scammed, basically, but I was very sensitive about it. It was a hard thing to say to someone, I don't think you exist. I think you're someone else's creation. I think you are that someone else. It's a very strange thing. But I immediately, as a storyteller, realized that I was onto something really quite interesting, and I built a fictional story around it using a lot of my experience. And that experience, that in the film itself, that's been opened up in an even more adventurous way than in the novel. And we shot last winter in New York with Robin and Toni Collette in the role of the mother.
She's brilliant.
She is. She was actually, Robin and Toni were our first choices to play these characters. I co-wrote the script, by the way, with Terry Anderson, my partner at that time. So we were basically making a movie about our own breakup and this mystery that happened to both of us. I was very impressed in the book. I mean, both plots were so powerful. The breakup and the relationship with the boy, Pete, were both such a delicate dance of intimacy and bonds, and it was a tough
a tough thing, and each one sort of made the other one more poignant.
Thank you. That's good to know. It provided relief for me, because once I got worn out with one one aspect of the story, I could move to the other. The hardest part, of course, was trying to fairly analyze my relationship in such a way that I could try to tell it from what his side of the story was, and as well as mine, which is, of course, impossible, really. You're going to bring some prejudice to it one way or the other. As a matter of fact, I think maybe I was a little bit more unkind to myself than anything else, partially because that character was the central character, and it's more interesting if your central character is severely flawed. So I made his obsession with this voice on the phone much stronger than mine was, in the interest of telling the story.
I was curious as to how strong that bond was, because I think you were the bond, the telephone friendship lasted for several years after the doubts began.
Oh, 6 years after the doubts began. And even when the novel came out in the year 2000 and I was touring the world to promote it, there were people who recognized, unlike in The Night Listener, this boy's book was published. And so there were people who'd read the book and knew about his experience and thought it sounded awfully familiar in some way. And so at the time, I was having to be very circumspect about what I said. It is fiction, and we're going to have to continue saying that when the film comes out, because we've invented even newer things for the film. But the central idea of someone possibly not being who you think they are on the other end of the phone with the same history is very much there. And I was worried legally, frankly, that somebody was going to show up out of nowhere with this one-legged, one-lunged, one testicle, by the way, because she had a hard time explaining why the boy's voice wasn't changing as he got older. I'm maybe giving away more than I should here at this point, because I'd like it still to be a mystery for people. And the way it unfolds, I think, is surprising even to people who know the real-life story behind it. The New Yorker did... a writer named Tad Friend at The New Yorker did a very long piece. I guess there is no other kind of piece in The New Yorker, but on this real story behind it. Anthony Godby Johnson was the name that the kid was given, and Vicky Fragonal was the woman who was caring for him.
It sounds like it could almost be an anagram like Anna Madrigal.
Well, it's funny. She played all sorts of games over the years with names. Some people who got really close to the kid were told things that other people weren't told, and there are levels of truth that, to this day, the man who published this book is adamant in his belief that the child exists and has been speaking to him on the phone for 12 years without ever having seen him.
Oh my
Of course,
goodness.
at this point, he's, 26 or 7.
With a very high voice.
With his endless terminal illnesses. But he's quite adamant in his belief that what he published is a true autobiography. But I think part of the reason he believes that is that he's told things by her that nobody else gets to hear, that somehow explain all the unanswered questions.
Well, as a lifelong storyteller, in some ways that must be a good thing to hear, just how powerful
Well, you
these stories are.
recognize another storyteller when you see one. That's what happens, and that's what fascinated me about because Gabriel Noon, the protagonist in The Night Listener, is a radio storyteller. He's been telling his stories, on an NPR station, as a matter of fact, in New York, and links up with this listener in that way. So it's all about voices. What the kid thinks that Gabriel is like, what Gabriel thinks the kid is like. It plays with that, and plays with the notion of telling stories to save our lives. That sometimes the truth doesn't serve us, so we have to place things into a fictional context in order to create order out of the chaos. I think that's why most novelists write. They're not really telling their own lives, they're pulling aspects of their own lives out and using them to give things a pattern when there really isn't one in life. And that's what an artist does, any kind of artist does, is find the pattern.
Now, tell us a little bit about the movie. I think you've just previewed it with Robin Williams, you said. You got to see.
Yeah, they flew, the producers flew the first print of it out for Robin to screen, and that was the second time I saw the rough cut of it last summer, but I hadn't seen it with the music laid on and the sound adjusted and all of that. So Robin and I and Terry Anderson and my partner Chris and well, that was pretty much it. Very few people. We just sat and watched it in the screening room at the Presidio.
And what did you think?
Well, first of all, I was hoping that Robin would be thrilled, and he was. And I was very happy with it. I didn't have any cringe moments, you know. It's hard to judge after a while when it's your own work. You don't know how well the mystery unfolds. I'm very eager to see it with an audience. But I'm hopeful. The projectionist came out and caught me at the elevator, and he didn't know anything about it. And he said, "I just want you to know I couldn't take my eyes off the screen." So that was good news.
And you're a Hitchcock fan, aren't you? So
I am. So suddenly my own Hitchcock movie was just sort of dumped in my lap in real life, and I knew I had to write about it.
Well, tell us a bit about the process of making the movie. You were working with your ex, Terry Anderson, and Robin Williams and Toni Collette, and you were helping adapt the screenplay. So tell us a bit about the whole process.
Well, Terry and I worked on the screenplay together, and then Patrick Stettner, our director, came on board, and he had a shot at it, but in the most diplomatic, wonderful way. It was a great collaborative effort because he'd try out an idea, and we'd tell him frankly if we didn't think it was working, and often that meant it would be, well, there was nothing we didn't agree on in the end. That was the great part about it.
That had to be exciting.
It was a wonderful process. It was hard for me and Terry. One of the things I've learned is that I don't want to spill the beans about my personal life that much more anymore, because those elements are hard enough to just handle in and of themselves, but when you're having to describe them or justify them to the world, it's really difficult. And there were times when, on the set, when Robin and his partner, he's played by the estranged partner is played by Bobby Cannavale.
Oh, that's a nice estranged partner to have.
Yeah, and one that would break your heart if he was leaving. Wonderful actor. And
he is.
Conveys the most extraordinary warmth and in the film. It's amazing. But there are a couple of really tough fights between them that we were filming, and Terry and I'd be sitting there with our headphones on, watching them, and it would stir up stuff, and it was tough. It was very hard to do. But it was fun to shoot. It was fun to be on the set with Robin. Let's start out that way. What an amazing man, you know. I've known him since many years ago, since the Mork days. I actually spent my 40th birthday up at his ranch. I have a memory of him picking up my poodle and doing 30 minutes with the poodle. It just didn't stop.
I wonder what the poodle's memories of that event were. He may not have looked back at it as fondly as you.
Well, the man does have a need to entertain, and he does do it. And anybody who's on the street, you know, someone said, one of the New York cops or somebody came up and said, "You want us to keep the barricade?" And Robin's assistant said, "If you put up a barricade, he'll leap over it." And in fact, if he saw 3 teenage girls giggling on the sidelines, wondering if they could catch a glimpse of him, he would go over and be friendly, you know?
He is brilliant on so many levels. It is, I mean, both the comedy and the acting now. I mean, he's become a serious...
acting in The Night Listener just blew me away. That was the first thing I said to him. It was just astonishing what he did. And that's tough when somebody's sort of playing you, you know, sort of trying to get to the heart of what something was about in your life. And I was amazed at how well he did it. And the other thing that struck me about him was how extremely knowledgeable he was about all sorts of world affairs. He's a great liberal. I love him for that, but he's not a knee-jerk liberal. He's extremely thoughtful and educated about everything. I mean, he really keeps himself informed. He's been to Afghanistan and Iraq on a number of occasions.